Thank you for joining Detective Duo, your companion for stories of wit, charm, and quiet suspense, the kind Tommy and Tuppence might have uncovered in their early adventures. Subscribe for more of these mysteries, and let us know where you're listening from. The kettle hissed its final sigh, and Tuppence Beresford, balancing her teacup between thumb and forefinger, flicked through the Morning Post with practiced efficiency. Letters from charity committees, bills, a note from Aunt Griselda warning of her imminent visit, and the usual jumble of advertisements were spread across the oak tabletop like the scattered remnants of a half-finished jigsaw puzzle. Sunlight slanted in through the kitchen window, illuminating the fine dust motes that danced lazily in the air. For once, all was peaceful, domestic, and unremarkable. A perfect morning for a quiet cup of tea and a bit of harmless daydreaming. Across the room, Tommy was settled in his favourite chair, legs crossed, brow furrowed over the crossword in the Morning Gazette. He muttered under his breath as he wrestled with a particularly tricky clue. Not an easy one today. 5 letters, begins with P, probably Plaza. He scribbled it down, shrugged, and returned to the puzzle, oblivious to the brewing storm about to intrude on their tranquillity. The doorbell rang, sharp, insistent. Tuppence set down her cup, frowning. Visitors at this hour were rare, and she prided herself on knowing the rhythm of the day. Crossing the hallway, she opened the door to reveal a woman of indistinct age, impeccably dressed, and moving with a polite, almost rehearsed confidence. Her eyes were clear, attentive, and just the faintest hint of urgency fluttered beneath the surface. "Good morning," the visitor said, her voice lilting, precise. "I am Mrs. Beresford." Tuppence blinked, startled. "Excuse me?" "Mrs. Beresford," the woman repeated, inclining her head. I am someone who knows the danger your husband faces. Only I can explain. You must listen." Her hand trembled slightly as she extended a note. The faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume, something floral, overlaid with a sharper, spicy undertone, wafted toward Tuppence. It made her pause. Tommy, hearing the interruption, looked up from his crossword. "Danger? What danger?" He raised a brow, clearly unconvinced. "Honestly, Tuppence, I'd think you'd be more concerned with burnt toast than imaginary peril." Tuppence bristled. "This is no jest, Tommy. Look at her." She gestured toward the visitor, whose poise remained perfect despite the intensity in her gaze. "She claims to be, well, herself, or me, or something like that." The visitor offered a faint, almost apologetic smile. "I assure you the matter is serious, but I cannot remain long. I must give you this note." She pressed a folded scrap of paper into Tuppence's hand. "Read it when he is not watching. Time is of the essence." Without another word, she turned, her heel clicks echoing down the hallway. The front door closed behind her with a soft but decisive thud. Tuppence stared after her, mind racing. The note felt heavy in her hand, as though weighted with more than paper. Threat, warning, perhaps a promise. She carefully unfolded it. Faint, hurried handwriting spelled out a single cryptic instruction. "At 11, the key will be revealed. Do not trust the man at the corner." Tommy finally leaned forward, peering at the note over Tuppence's shoulder. "Really," he said, frowning, "this is most likely a prank. Some bored soul in the neighbourhood thinking it amusing to frighten the lady of the house." He returned to his crossword, clearly unconcerned, muttering something about a particularly fiendish anagram. Tuppence, however, could not be dismissed so easily. Her curiosity, always her weakness and her strength, was fully engaged. Something about the visitor's insistence, her meticulous speech, the unplaceable perfume, and the tremor of her hand all spoke of truth beneath layers of secrecy. The shadow that had flitted across the window as the woman left, the door slightly ajar that had never been left so, and the faint sound of hurried footsteps retreating down the street lingered in Tuppence's mind. She glanced at Tommy again. "I know you'll think me foolish, but I cannot ignore this. Someone is moving in the shadows, and if she says Tommy is in danger, well, I intend to find out why." Tommy rubbed his eyes and exhaled. "You make it sound so cinematic. Honestly, I was enjoying a quiet morning, a spot of tea, a puzzle, the ordinary rhythm of life, and now we have someone claiming to be us, warning me of imaginary threats. Delightful, truly delightful. He shook his head, but there was a hint of amusement behind his protest. Tuppence felt a flicker of irritation. "You're missing the point. The note, it's real. She left it. And I swear I saw movement. Footsteps outside. Someone could be watching, Tommy. You must see that this isn't mere coincidence." He finally set the pen aside, leaning back with a resigned sigh. "Very well," he murmured. "I will humour you, if only to keep you from poking the postman with your umbrella. What's our first move, detective?" Tuppence's lips curved into a small, determined smile. "We read the note carefully, consider every word, and then we investigate." Her gaze drifted to the letter once more. Every curl of the handwriting seemed laden with intent. Every spacing and tilt whispered secrecy. The thrill of potential discovery made her pulse quicken. Outside, the morning street carried on with its usual indifference. A cart rattled down the cobbled lane, a baker's apprentice called out, and a dog barked in the distance. Yet beneath the mundane rhythm, an undercurrent of tension persisted. Unseen eyes, whispered motives, and a story unfolding that the Beresfords were now entangled in. "Do you notice something odd?" Tuppence asked, lowering her voice as she moved to the window. Tommy followed reluctantly, frowning. "The door's slightly ajar," she said, pointing. "And that shadow, there, it moved quickly when she left." Tommy squinted, then shrugged. "Probably the milkman." Tuppence shook her head. "No, Tommy, this is not the milkman. This is someone else. Someone clever, someone with purpose. And they know you." He raised an eyebrow, half irritated, half impressed. "Well then, we are officially caught in a mystery. Very well, Tuppence. You may lead the charge." A gust of wind rattled the leaves outside, carrying with it the faint echo of footsteps retreating into the distance. Tuppence's fingers tightened around the note. A mix of trepidation and excitement surged within her. The ordinary morning had been irrevocably transformed, and in that quiet kitchen, a new adventure had begun. For the first time that day, Tommy looked unsettled, however slightly. The crossword lay forgotten. Tuppence, her eyes bright with resolve, whispered to herself, "Let's see where this takes us." And so, with a cryptic note, an enigmatic visitor, and the faintest hint of danger threading through the mundane, the Beresfords stepped forward into a mystery that would pull them through the twisting streets of London and into shadows where identities were never as they seemed. The first clues were laid, the first questions posed, and the stage set for the unravelling of a deception far larger than either could have anticipated. Tuppence sat back in the kitchen chair, the note delicately unfolded on her lap. The morning sunlight spilled across the polished tabletop, catching the faint smudge of a fingerprint in the corner of the paper. She traced it with a fingertip, wondering how many hands had handled this scrap before it reached her. It smelled faintly of the same floral spice as the visitor's perfume, exotic, slightly bitter, and utterly unfamiliar. Tommy lounged across from her, legs sprawled, one boot resting casually on the edge of the chair. He peeked over his newspaper, eyebrows arched in that way that made him seem simultaneously sceptical and amused. "Really, Tuppence," he said, voice dripping with ironic exasperation, "I half expect you to pull a revolver from the teapot next. Why is it that every time you stumble upon a mystery, the entire city must be involved?" Tuppence ignored him, focusing on the note. "At 11, the key will be revealed. Do not trust the man at the corner." She read it aloud slowly, savouring each phrase. The writing was hurried, uneven, but precise enough to suggest someone educated, someone deliberate. Half an address was scribbled at the top, an unfinished string of letters and numbers that could only belong to a lodging somewhere in central London. "It's not just whimsical," she said, eyes narrowing. "Someone knows something, and—" she tapped the smudged corner. "They left fingerprints. This is real, Tommy." He sighed, tossing the paper onto the table. "Fine, fine. Let's investigate. But I warn you, Tuppence, if we spend the day following shadows and anonymous notes, I shall insist on a proper breakfast first. One cannot pursue criminals on an empty stomach." "Criminals or impostors," Tuppence corrected, rising with an air of authority. "And we shall eat after, not before." She grabbed her coat, slinging it over one shoulder, while Tommy reluctantly tugged on his hat and straightened his collar. The streets of London buzzed with mid-morning life as they walked, and already Tuppence felt the shift from domestic tranquillity to uneasy vigilance. Every passer-by seemed a potential observer, a man in a bowler hat lingering too long on the corner, a woman carrying a shopping basket who kept glancing over her shoulder, and a stray dog sniffing at the edge of the pavement, adding a low, ominous growl to the hum of the city. "Notice the garden gate?" Tuppence whispered, stopping at the edge of a neat terrace house. "It's slightly ajar. Someone may have passed through recently." Tommy peered at it, then shrugged. "Or the wind," he muttered, though his eyes betrayed a hint of unease. Tuppence rolled her eyes. "Tommy, the wind does not leave fingerprints on notes or mysterious perfume lingering in doorways. Focus." They approached the first location indicated by the cryptic address, a modest, nondescript lodging tucked between two larger buildings. The brass numbers were tarnished, the paint chipped, and the windows shuttered. It looked as though no one had lived there for some time. Yet, a faint disturbance in the dust on the stoop betrayed recent movement. Tuppence crouched to examine it. A glove lay partially hidden beneath the railing, one of those slender, almost delicate leather gloves, the type a woman would wear. She lifted it with care. "Too small for Tommy," she said with a faint smile, then turned to him. "And yet, clearly someone has been here recently." Tommy scratched his head. "Do you think it's hers? The woman who left the note?" He gestured vaguely at the lodging. "Perhaps, or someone else entirely. That is the problem with these mysteries. They rarely present themselves honestly." A shadow flitted across the narrow street, and both instinctively glanced up. A man, hat pulled low, lingered just past the corner, eyes following them with unsettling intent. He vanished the moment Tuppence squinted in his direction. "See what I mean?" she said. "Someone is watching." Tommy exhaled and shook his head. "I was hoping the day would be quiet. I must admit, though, it is slightly thrilling, like a theatrical production with me in the lead role." "Perhaps you were born for the stage," Tuppence replied dryly. She rose and peered at the lodging once more. "We must go in, observe carefully, but not disturb anything, unless we have to. The note warned us, after all." The door, surprisingly, was unlocked. She exchanged a glance with Tommy. "I do not like it," he muttered, stepping aside so she could enter first. Inside, the air was stale, tinged with faint traces of tobacco smoke and varnish. A dusty coat hung on a hook, an open window let in the scent of coal smoke from the street below, and the faint creak of a floorboard echoed ominously as they moved. Tuppence tiptoed across the threshold, scanning for anything out of place. A misplaced envelope lay on a side table. Its seal was broken, revealing a few pages of illegible scribbles. "Red herring," she murmured, recognizing immediately that the contents were meant to mislead any curious visitor. Tommy, despite himself, felt a flicker of apprehension. "You're right. Someone has been careful here. Everything looks mundane, yet nothing is what it seems." They inspected the rooms, a small bedroom, a kitchen with chipped tiles, a sitting area with a threadbare rug. Each detail, the alignment of chairs, the smudge on the windowsill, the faint perfume lingering in corners, suggested the lodging was recently abandoned but deliberately arranged to confuse intruders. Tuppence crouched by the fireplace and noticed a faint outline on the hearthstone, almost imperceptible, a possible impression left by a ledger or book. Carefully, she pressed her fingers to it. "Something was here," she said, "but removed quickly. Someone knows we might come, or they anticipate our curiosity." Tommy leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets. "I must say, Tuppence, you have an uncanny knack for stumbling directly into the perfect scene of suspense. I feel as though we are characters in a story, and our author is taking great pleasure in frightening us." Tuppence smiled faintly, tension still tightening her chest. "Let us hope this author is on our side." A faint scuffling sound drifted from the street outside. Both froze, listening. A newspaper fluttered across the cobblestones, carried by a stray breeze. The footsteps passed by the window, slow and deliberate, fading down the lane. Tuppence pressed her ear to the glass, noting the direction, the rhythm. "They're close. Too close for comfort," she whispered. Tommy peered at her, eyes narrowed. "Well, if we are indeed the leads in a real-life drama, I suppose we must continue to act accordingly. Lead on, Miss Detective." They left the lodging as quietly as they had entered, stepping onto the street and pulling their coats tightly around them. The shadow from earlier seemed to linger still, just beyond the corner, observing with patient intent. Tuppence clutched the note in her hand, feeling the weight of the first thread of the mystery. The day pressed on, bustling London oblivious to the quiet tension threading through its streets. As they walked, Tuppence considered every detail: the half-address, the warning of the man at the corner, the smudged fingerprint, the abandoned lodging, the glove, and the envelope. Each clue raised questions. Each small discovery teased them toward answers that remained just out of reach. "Someone is orchestrating this," she said, voice low, "and they know exactly how to manipulate what we see, what we think, and what we believe." Tommy nodded slowly. "Then we must be cleverer still. If this is indeed a game, I suppose we are now fully engaged. Shall we begin our investigation in earnest?" Tuppence's eyes sparkled with the thrill of the hunt, tempered by caution. "We shall, step by step, clue by clue. But mark my words, Tommy, we are being watched, and the first act has only just begun." As they moved on toward the next lead, the city's familiar rhythm continued around them. The clatter of carts, the distant whistle of a train, the murmur of conversations carried on the wind. Yet beneath the ordinary hum, an undercurrent of unease pulsed, the knowledge that danger and deception were never far away. And with that, the Beresfords embarked fully upon a trail that promised intrigue, misdirection, and a game in which only the sharpest eyes and quickest minds would prevail. From the window, Tuppence noticed the familiar bustle of the street, and then a shadow moving with deliberate purpose along a nearby alley. She nudged Tommy, whispering, "Look, someone's observing us, just beyond that corner." Tommy squinted, brushing imaginary lint from his jacket. "Probably the milkman again." "Or perhaps someone with a vested interest in our meddling," Tuppence countered, a smirk playing on her lips. Her gaze swept the room again, noting the minor clues: a folded handkerchief carelessly draped over a chair, the smudged ashtray, and the faint outline of a ledger beneath the floorboards. It was the ledger that caught Tuppence's curiosity most. Kneeling, she pressed her fingers lightly to the floor, feeling a subtle hollow beneath the boards. Carefully, she pried one plank loose, revealing a piece of paper folded and tucked away with deliberate care. On it, a small crossword puzzle had been scribbled, every square a clue in itself, the solution forming a message when read in a certain pattern. Tommy leaned over, brow furrowed. "Crosswords as secret messages. How very ingenious. I must admit, I feel both impressed and slightly exasperated." "Focus, Tommy," Tuppence said, her fingers moving deftly to decode the message. Letter by letter, they uncovered a phrase: "Meet at the corner where books whisper, and the day begins anew." "Bookshop?" Tommy guessed aloud. "Corner. Books. Seems plausible." "Exactly," Tuppence agreed. She folded the puzzle neatly and replaced the floorboard, restoring the room's deceptive ordinariness. "The visitor wants us to follow, and she's already anticipating our steps. Someone is orchestrating this with remarkable precision." And they left the lodging, the hallway's stale air giving way to the livelier scent of the street. Coal smoke, fresh bread from a nearby bakery, the faint tang of rain still clinging to the cobblestones from an early morning drizzle. Every detail seemed amplified in their heightened awareness: the clatter of a cart, the chatter of pedestrians, even the low growl of a dog in a nearby alley. "Careful with that shadow again," Tuppence warned as they walked. "It's more than just a coincidence." Tommy adjusted his tie once more, muttering, "If my tie is perfect, surely the shadows will fear me." Tuppence rolled her eyes, stifling a chuckle. "I think they've bigger concerns than your neckwear." Their next stop was a small, tidy shop around the corner. The bell tinkled as they entered, and the proprietor, a round-faced man with spectacles perched precariously on the bridge of his nose, peered up from behind the counter. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice hesitant, as though he knew he ought not to. Tuppence smiled politely. "We're looking for information about someone who might have lodged nearby." The man's eyes flickered, calculating, then softened. "I may know something," he said slowly. "A lady. She comes and goes, very particular. Leaves notes or books sometimes, but no one really sees her arrive or depart. Quite the enigma." Tommy's eyes widened. "Sounds exactly like our friend." The proprietor nodded. "I only know she asks questions, collects things, and if you're not careful, she disappears before you can make sense of it. He tapped a finger on the counter. Very clever, that one, but cautious too. You'll find she leaves little trails if you know how to read them. Thank you, Tuppence said warmly. That's very helpful. Outside, the street seemed ordinary again, yet every passer-by now carried a potential significance. A man paused at the corner, pretending to examine a lamppost, while a woman pushed a pram slowly past them, glancing back with faint curiosity. Every detail teased the imagination, offering possibilities that may or may not be relevant. Tuppence and Tommy approached the location indicated by the coded crossword message. A small bookshop stood at the intersection, a narrow doorway with stacks of books spilling onto the pavement, their spines worn and inviting. She paused, looking through the window, and there it was, a note pinned inside the glass, folded neatly with precise edges. Another one, she murmured, excitement and apprehension mingling in her voice. She knows we'll be here. Tommy leaned closer, peering over her shoulder. Persistent, isn't she? He muttered. I suppose we ought to read it. Tuppence carefully retrieved the note. Its handwriting was familiar now. Hurried, precise, deliberate. The words offered instructions for their next move, precise enough to suggest careful surveillance, vague enough to ensure tension remained high. Whoever was orchestrating these clues had anticipated every action the Beresfords might take. A sudden bark startled them both. A large, scruffy dog emerged from the alley, its teeth bared and hackles raised. Tommy jumped back, nearly tipping his hat. Tuppence hissed under her breath. Careful. Stay calm. The dog advanced slowly, testing them, its growl resonating through the narrow street. Tuppence, ever quick-thinking, tossed a small pebble toward the pavement. The dog's attention shifted, giving them a narrow window to retreat safely. They moved briskly to the side of the shop, hearts racing, minds alert. Once at a safe distance, Tuppence turned to Tommy, smirking despite the adrenaline. You see? Every step is orchestrated, even the dog. We are being guided, tested, perhaps even taunted. Tommy, brushing himself off, let out a resigned chuckle. If this is all part of some grand design, I hope our audience enjoys the suspense. I, for one, am thoroughly on edge. Good, Tuppence replied, eyes glinting with determination. Edge is exactly where we need to be. The note in her hand offered more questions than answers, a second puzzle waiting to unfold. And though the streets of London carried on with their ordinary bustle, the Beresfords felt the unmistakable pressure of unseen eyes, the sense that every step they took was anticipated, every move shadowed. With the first lodging explored, the coded message deciphered, and the bookshop note discovered, they now had a path to follow. The visitor had engineered events with precision, creating both clues and misdirection, and the Beresfords were caught in a game that was just beginning. Hand in hand with their wit, courage, and keen observation, they stepped into the next phase of the mystery. And as they moved down the narrow London streets, each echo of footstep and rustle of paper seemed to carry the promise of revelation, or the threat of deception yet to come. The stranger in the lodging had left her mark, and the game was very much afoot. The narrow streets of London gave way to a quieter, more polished avenue, where the morning bustle softened into an almost conspiratorial hush. Tommy and Tuppence moved with deliberate steps, each glance over a shoulder quick, assessing the passing pedestrians for any sign of pursuit. The note from the bookshop had been concise. The gathering awaits. Observe carefully. The truth is within reach. No address, no overt instructions, just a nudge into a world of social masks and whispered intrigues. Tuppence adjusted her gloves as they approached a discreet doorway, tucked between two marble-fronted buildings. Crystal light flickered from within, casting fractured patterns across the polished sidewalk. A private club, I expect, she murmured. Not the sort of place you wander into by mistake. Tommy, adjusting his tie for the third time in as many minutes, quipped, Perfect. Nothing like blending with the upper crust while hunting shadows. Let me just check my credentials. Amateur sleuth, occasional nuisance, terribly handsome. She elbowed him lightly. Focus, Tommy. Remember the visitor's precision. She wants us here, and she'll be watching. Inside, the club was a blend of elegance and subtle menace. Crystal chandeliers glittered above, throwing prismatic light across polished mahogany panels. The low murmur of conversation seemed deliberate, masking intentions as surely as a well-fitted mask. Guests mingled with the practiced ease of those accustomed to wealth, their laughter and small talk acting as an invisible barrier against scrutiny. Yet beneath the veneer of civility, Tuppence sensed the faint vibrations of secrecy, the subtle tension between observed gestures and concealed motives. They paused near a buffet, examining the room discreetly. A nervous solicitor hovered near the bar, glancing repeatedly at his watch and shifting his weight from one polished shoe to another. His eyes met Tommy's briefly, darting away as though guilty of some minor transgression. Across the room, a socialite in a gown of pale pink leaned against a column, her smile engaging, curious, and overly attentive to the comings and goings of guests. Tuppence noted the subtle ways she intercepted conversations, the small, calculated movements betraying a mind intent on gathering information. "See the solicitor," Tuppence whispered, nodding toward the fidgeting man. "Shifty. Either he knows something, or he's been ordered to act suspicious." Tommy squinted, voice low and measured. "Or both. Sometimes, Tuppence, people are guilty simply because it's entertaining for the rest of us to think so." She shot him a warning glance. "Remember, this is serious. One of them could be her, the imposter, and she is clever." Their careful observation yielded subtle clues almost immediately. Fragments of overheard conversation, clipped and seemingly innocuous, hinted at connections and duplicity. The socialite spoke briefly to a distinguished gentleman, murmuring a name Tuppence recognized from the ledger, the same one associated with the previous lodging. The gentleman, tall and imposing, with a neatly trimmed moustache, frowned as he examined their entrance, questioning their presence with a politeness that barely concealed suspicion. "Quite the welcoming committee," Tommy muttered dryly. "I feel as though we are both under scrutiny and entertainment." Tuppence smirked. "Just blend, observe, and note every irregularity. Even small gestures matter. The way someone adjusts a sleeve, the hesitation before a handshake, all are windows into character." They moved through the crowd with practiced discretion, exchanging whispered observations. The nervous solicitor's eyes flickered repeatedly toward the doorway, as though expecting someone. The socialite's glances became increasingly focused, tracking their movements, and the distinguished gentleman, formally polite, inquired of Tommy in a low tone, "And you are friends of the house?" Tommy stammered, charmingly, "Yes, indeed. Friends. Admirers, even." He shot a playful glance at Tuppence, who hid her amusement behind a faint cough. As they navigated the room, a waiter approached with a tray of champagne flutes. Tuppence, ever observant, noticed a slip of paper folded beneath one of the glasses. With subtle dexterity, she retrieved it without drawing attention. The note contained a simple message: "Warehouse, midnight, alone." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Alone, she says. Charming. She must believe in the dramatics of suspense as much as we do." Tuppence tucked the note carefully into her glove. "It's our next lead, and she's still manipulating us, arranging events to guide our attention. Notice the precision, the timing, the delivery, the environment. Every detail is deliberate." A sudden movement at the far end of the room drew their attention. A woman, moving with fluid grace, paused momentarily near the exit. Her coat was dark, inconspicuous, yet her posture and the tilt of her head bespoke awareness and intelligence. Tuppence froze, heart quickening. Could it be her? The imposter? "Is that—" Tommy began, but Tuppence's raised hand silenced him. The woman glanced around, as if assessing the room, then moved toward the back corridor. Tuppence followed with her eyes, noting every subtle gesture, while Tommy's hands tightened at his sides. The imposter had anticipated their arrival. She was always one step ahead, always watching. "Remarkable," Tuppence murmured. "She orchestrates everything. Every move we make is anticipated." Tommy groaned lightly. And here I was, hoping for a quiet morning with tea and crosswords. Tuppence ignored him, eyes darting to another corner. A man in a dark suit, too polished, too poised, seemed to hover in proximity to the socialite. He exchanged rapid words with a delivery boy, then pocketed a small envelope, glancing around to ensure no one saw. Every observation reinforced their suspicion that deception was rife. Everyone was playing a part, but only some parts mattered. They remained in the room for several more minutes, observing interactions, noting subtle exchanges of glances, the faintest gestures that might indicate collusion or hidden motives. Tuppence whispered every detail to Tommy, who responded with dry, sarcastic commentary. "I feel like a theatre critic," he muttered, "except the play may end with us being kidnapped or worse." Finally, the impostor slipped through the side door, leaving behind the subtle echo of her movement, a faint scent reminiscent of the perfume she had worn during her first appearance. Tuppence's pulse quickened. "She knew we were here," she said, voice low. "She always knows." Tommy's jaw tightened. Well, that's irritating. To be anticipated at every turn. It's almost flattering, in a slightly maddening way. They left the club with care, moving toward the street, blending with the departing guests. The crisp air outside was a relief, but the sense of being observed persisted. Tuppence clutched both notes, the one from the bookshop, the new one from the waiter, realizing the careful choreography of the impostor's guidance. "She wants us to follow her trail," she said, "and she is watching, always watching." Tommy nodded. "Then we shall follow, carefully, and perhaps invest in a sturdier hat to protect against all this drama." Their steps carried them down a quieter street, anticipation tightening every muscle. Each glance, each sound, each flicker of movement around the corners hinted at unseen eyes, waiting to test their wits. The glamorous setting of the club had revealed not only the social theatre of the upper crust, but also the intricacy of deception the Beresfords were entangled in. Tuppence paused at a lamp-post, folding the notes neatly. Every clue, every shadow, every whisper, they are pieces of a larger puzzle, and she is daring us to solve it. Tommy sighed. "I should have known calm mornings are for the naive, but I must admit the chase is compelling and dangerous, which makes it all the more exhilarating." They turned a corner, and the evening light began to soften the edges of the day. Across the street, the faint flicker of a bookshop window caught Tuppence's attention. Another note had been placed, folded into the display, as if placed there by invisible hands. Her fingers trembled slightly with excitement. "She's foreseen this, Tommy. Each note, each clue, each misdirection, it's all deliberate. She's orchestrating the investigation from a distance." Tommy squinted at the display. "I say, this is getting theatrical. I can almost hear an unseen narrator providing commentary as we stumble from one act to the next." Tuppence smiled faintly, the thrill of the hunt energizing her. "Then let's not disappoint the audience. We move carefully, observe keenly, and above all, stay ahead of the shadows." A soft bark echoed from a nearby alley, momentarily distracting them. Tuppence glanced at Tommy, who raised an eyebrow. "Yes, the city has its own soundtrack, always reminding us that danger and intrigue lurk in the ordinary." The notes, the coded puzzles, the observations at the club, they all formed threads leading toward a web of deception, and Tuppence knew, with the certainty that sharpened her mind and quickened her pulse, that the impostor was always one step ahead, drawing them deeper into a game that was far from over. With the next clue now in hand, the Beresfords pressed forward, ready to follow the trail wherever it might lead. The shadows of deception had grown longer, and the stakes higher, but so too had their resolve. London's streets, glittering with the last light of day, seemed ordinary once more, yet every movement, every whisper, every glint of crystal or corner of shadow hinted at the unfolding drama that awaited them. And somewhere, just beyond their sight, the woman who called herself Mrs. Beresford smiled faintly at the success of her careful orchestration. The stage was set. The street that led to the warehouse was narrow, its cobblestones slick with the last remnants of morning rain. Yet none of the passing pedestrians seemed to notice the two figures slipping through shadows with deliberate purpose. Tuppence's hand clutched the notes carefully. Tommy's eyes flicked from doorway to doorway as they approached the unremarkable brick facade, the muted light from a lone overhead lamp casting angular shadows that danced across the rough walls. The warehouse itself exuded menace even from a distance. Rust streaked the corrugated metal siding. The paint on the heavy double doors had blistered and flaked away in irregular patches. A faint groan of metal on hinges echoed as a gust of wind nudged the doors slightly, hinting at the emptiness within, yet betraying the subtle hum of movement concealed behind the shadows. Tuppence nudged Tommy lightly. "Remember, eyes sharp. She may already be expecting us." Tommy adjusted his jacket with a dramatic flourish, muttering, I do hope she appreciates the sartorial effort I make in her honour." Rolling her eyes, Tuppence tugged the door open, careful to make as little noise as possible. The interior smelled of damp wood, dust, and the faint tang of rust. Shadows pooled in the corners like ink, stretching across rows of towering crates and discarded machinery. A single bulb, hanging precariously from a frayed wire, cast an uneven light that made movement uncertain and suspicion inevitable. They split to cover more ground, Tuppence moving left toward a stack of crates, Tommy veering toward a set of partially open doors at the far end. Even in this tense environment, miscommunication arose almost immediately. Tommy's footsteps caught in a coil of rope, sending a clatter echoing across the cavernous space. "Tommy!" Tuppence hissed, ducking behind a crate. "Just adjusting," he called back sheepishly, untangling his legs. "I assure you, no intruder could have heard me." Tuppence's lips twitched. Unless, of course, they have exceptionally sensitive ears and a flair for dramatic timing. The warehouse was a curious blend of menace and domestic incongruity. On top of a rusted crate, she noticed a teacup, half-filled and abandoned, a scarf draped casually over a beam, and a ledger left open on the floor. Each item was at once a clue and a distraction, teasing the investigators into assuming familiarity where there might be none. Tuppence picked up the ledger carefully, leafing through its pages. Letters, invoices, and hastily scribbled notes hinted at financial irregularities and potential blackmail. Among the entries, several bore names she recognized from earlier investigations: the enigmatic socialite, the distinguished gentleman from the club, and a minor solicitor who had seemed nervous but harmless. Fingerprints on some of the pages matched the smudge on the note from the bookshop, a subtle but telling detail. Tommy approached, picking up a scrap of newspaper from the floor. "Odd," he muttered. "A clipping about a burglary in a distant part of the city. Seems unrelated, yet placed here deliberately. Red herring, perhaps?" Tuppence nodded. "Yes, designed to mislead us. She is clever." Movement near the far wall drew their attention. A man, younger and dressed in plain work clothes, emerged from the shadows, hands raised in what could be interpreted as surprise or accusation. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice cautious but edged with suspicion. "You're not the police, are you?" "Hardly," Tuppence replied, stepping forward, calm but assertive. "We're concerned citizens, friends of someone who has connections to this warehouse." The man hesitated, his eyes darting to Tommy. "I see. Well, do be careful. There are others about, and you shouldn't touch things you don't understand." Tuppence's eyes scanned his posture, the tightness of his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands. Not a criminal, she thought, more likely a messenger or a minor accomplice caught off guard. "We'll be cautious," she said smoothly, folding the ledger. "But your warning is noted. Thank you." The man retreated into the shadows, leaving the couple with an eerie sense of surveillance. They resumed their search, examining crates, boxes, and machinery. Each discovery was a mixture of suspense and amusement. Tommy's coat snagged on a protruding nail, eliciting a muffled groan and a whispered apology, while Tuppence found herself stifling a laugh at his increasingly theatrical contortions. Amid the crates, she discovered letters tied neatly with string, addressed to various individuals under assumed names. Forged documents suggested that the woman who called herself Mrs. Beresford was far more deeply involved than a single incident. Identity theft, blackmail, and financial manipulation were all hinted at, forming a web that spanned locations, people, and motives. A faint whiff of perfume, identical to that of the visitor, lingered in the air. Tuppence inhaled lightly, confirming her suspicions. The impostor had been here recently, perhaps moments before. Every detail, the teacup, the ledger, the scarf, was curated to mislead, to create distractions that required sharp observation to interpret correctly. Tommy, meanwhile, had discovered a mechanical contraption partially obscured by crates. He attempted to examine it, but in doing so, caught his sleeve in a rotating gear, causing a minor racket. "Blast and bother," he whispered under his breath, pulling free. Tuppence's voice was both amused and scolding. "Honestly, Tommy, one more slip and I shall leave you to explain yourself to the impostor." Hours seemed to pass as they worked methodically, following subtle clues and ignoring false leads. A small, folded note tucked into a book on a high shelf indicated a scheduled meeting, a location previously unmentioned and seemingly innocuous. They memorized the instructions, aware that each step carried risk. Suddenly, the warehouse door banged shut with a thunderous slam, reverberating through the cavernous interior. Both froze, hearts leaping. Footsteps echoed from above, and Tuppence's eyes darted to a narrow catwalk where shadows flickered. Tommy grasped her arm lightly. "Someone's here," he murmured. "Or they want us to think so," she countered, voice low. Yet the tension was unmistakable. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of wind through the cracks, suggested both presence and anticipation. The couple moved quickly, retracing their path through the crates, each step calculated. Tuppence's mind raced, passing possibilities. The imposter herself, a minor accomplice returning, or merely the building's natural noises exaggerated by nerves. Every detail mattered. By the time they reached the exit, a faint scuffle had ceased, leaving silence in its wake. Tuppence carefully pushed the door open. The damp evening air carried the familiar hum of the city, grounding them after the tense exploration. Returning to their flat, Tuppence found a telegram waiting, slipped beneath the door with precise timing. She tore it open. Next phase, meet at the dockside, midnight, alone. Trust no one, MB. Tommy read over her shoulder, exhaling a mix of irritation and reluctant excitement. "Alone," she says. "I see. And here I thought a quiet evening with tea would be pleasant. Instead, we have night rendezvous at a dock." Tuppence folded the telegram, her eyes sparkling with determination. "It's exactly what I expected. The trail is longer than anticipated. She's orchestrating, testing, daring us to keep up." Tommy ran a hand through his hair. "I do hope she appreciates our perseverance, or our resilience, or perhaps both." Tuppence smirked. "Both, no doubt. But more importantly, she underestimates our resolve. Every step she arranges brings her closer to exposure, and we will be ready." Even as they sat quietly, reviewing the evidence, the forged documents, letters, ledger, notes, the gravity of the web they had entered became clear. The woman calling herself Mrs. Beresford was no ordinary impostor. She had calculated her moves with precision, leaving breadcrumbs to test observation, discern character, and manipulate the pace of discovery. Outside, London's streets carried on with indifferent rhythm. Carts rattled, voices murmured, and distant trains whistled along tracks. Yet the couple knew that somewhere in the shadows, the orchestrator of this intricate deception watched, anticipating every calculation. Tuppence's fingers lingered over the telegram. "At midnight, dockside, alone. No one can know our movements." Tommy nodded, half in jest, half in apprehension. "It seems our quiet days have vanished entirely, and yet—" He paused, a smile creeping onto his lips. "It is difficult to deny the thrill of it all. Adventure, danger, suspense, like a story we cannot put down." "Yes," Tuppence agreed, voice firm, "but this is no story. This is real, and we must be sharper, quicker, more observant than ever. One misstep, and the opportunity for discovery may vanish." The evening deepened, shadows stretching across the familiar streets, while within the flat the notes, ledgers, and clues lay scattered, a puzzle of deceit and strategy waiting to be solved. Tuppence and Tommy were poised, aware that the next encounter would be decisive. Every detail they had gathered, the warehouse, the minor accomplice, the red herrings, the cryptic telegram, formed a chain leading to a confrontation that would demand courage, wit, and the keenest powers of deduction. And so, with a city alive outside their window, yet veiled in intrigue, the Beresfords prepared for the night ahead. The game was escalating, the stakes higher than ever, and the woman who had drawn them into this labyrinth of deception remained tantalizingly out of reach, always present, always observing, always one step ahead. The telegram had been precise, terse in wording but brimming with implication. Suburbs, evening, observe quietly. She waits. MB. Tuppence folded it carefully, smoothing its edges, and exchanged a glance with Tommy. The city's clamour and shadows were behind them now. Ahead lay a street that seemed almost antiseptic in its neatness, a suburban tableau of clipped hedges, polished doorknobs, and homes that smiled politely but concealed lives untold. "It's unnervingly quiet," Tommy murmured, adjusting his collar as they walked along the sidewalk. "Too perfect, like one of those model streets in a real estate brochure, except every curtain is concealing a secret." Tuppence smiled at his theatrics. "Exactly. We mustn't be lulled into thinking suburban calm equals safety. Remember the visitor's methods. She thrives on the ordinary being misleading." A row of houses passed, each nearly identical, ivy curling around trellises, soft lawns meticulously raked, curtains drawn to varying degrees. The occasional neighbour glanced briefly from behind lace curtains, politely distant, polite yet alert. Every subtle glance and half-hidden motion was scrutinised by Tuppence, who catalogued their expressions, posture and tone. At the end of the street, they paused before a small ivy-covered house with paint just beginning to peel at the eaves. A faint scent of fresh paint lingered on the doorframe, mingling with the earthy aroma of disturbed soil. Footprints led from the gate across the path, suggesting recent activity. Tuppence crouched slightly to examine them. "Someone's been here today," she whispered. Tommy, already examining the neat flower beds with exaggerated care, reached for a garden hose and tripped over it, sprawling briefly onto the lawn. "Blast and bother," he muttered, picking himself up. Tuppence chuckled softly, shaking her head. "You make investigation hazardous, you know that?" "Hazardous but fashionable," he replied, dusting leaves from his coat. "I insist on style even when tripping over hoses." She rolled her eyes but allowed a faint smile. "Fashion, yes, but discretion must come first. The clues lie in subtlety." They approached the front door. The brass knob was cool, and the faint scent of perfume, recognizable now from previous encounters, wafted in the evening air. Tuppence's pulse quickened. She motioned for Tommy to stay alert as she opened the door, entering the small foyer. The interior was deceptively simple, a narrow hallway, floral wallpaper, and polished wooden floors. Yet the faint disturbances in dust along the hallway suggested movement. The slight offset of a rug, footprints across the polished boards, a hat discarded carelessly near the fence outside now visible through the front window. "Someone was here recently," Tuppence whispered, eyes scanning the room. "And yet they've taken great care not to reveal themselves fully." Tommy's gaze flicked to the fireplace, noting a faint draught and an irregularity in the brickwork. "Hidden compartment?" he suggested. Tuppence knelt, examining the hearth. Her fingers pressed along the edges, finding a small panel almost imperceptible. With deliberate care, she pressed the hidden latch, revealing a shallow compartment containing letters tied neatly with string, photographs, and documents. The materials hinted at multiple false identities, connections to financial irregularities, and a network of deception far broader than they had previously imagined. "Identity theft, blackmail, forgery," Tuppence murmured, scanning the letters. "She is no mere imposter. This is a carefully constructed web." Tommy lifted a photograph, a young woman in a dark coat standing in front of a London street. "Could this be her, the woman we're chasing?" "Perhaps," Tuppence said, her voice tense but quiet. "Or a carefully placed misdirection. Observe everything. Nothing is accidental." As they examined the materials, a faint creak from the hallway made them freeze. A shadow passed across the doorway, a visitor, unknown and silent, moving deliberately toward the room. Tommy whispered, "Well, it seems we have company." Tuppence's eyes narrowed. "Improvisation, Tommy. Quick thinking. Stay calm and follow my lead." The mysterious figure paused near the threshold. A man, plain-clothed but alert, regarded them suspiciously. "Who are you?" he asked, voice low though not hostile. "You shouldn't be here." "We're friends of someone who's expecting us," Tuppence said smoothly, standing upright. "Just passing through, nothing more." The man's gaze flicked to the letters and documents strewn across the floor. He took a cautious step forward. "You'd best leave those where they are. They're not for prying eyes." Tommy, attempting diplomacy, raised both hands slightly. "Understood, sir. We merely mean no harm. We are merely curious." The visitor studied them carefully, then retreated slightly. "Curiosity can be dangerous. Best you go quietly." Tuppence nodded, lips pressed in a thin line. "Of course, but know this. Curiosity also uncovers truth. As the man departed into the hallway, Tuppence quickly gathered the letters, photographs, and documents into a small satchel. Tommy followed, keeping an eye on the windows, doors, and subtle shifts of light within the house. Their movement was deliberate, silent, rehearsed, as though every step might be observed. A sudden noise from the street outside, a bicycle bell, then hurried footsteps, made Tommy freeze mid-step. "I swear the entire neighbourhood is conspiring to frighten us," he muttered under his breath. Tuppence smirked. "Only the clever ones. The rest are merely incidental. Keep moving." They reached the front door, but as Tuppence turned the handle, a faint voice drifted from the garden beyond the fence. A neighbour, peeking through lace curtains, observed them with mild curiosity, the expression unreadable. A cameo appearance, harmless perhaps, yet the subtle implication was clear. Someone may know more than they admit. Once outside, Tuppence tucked the satchel securely under her arm, scanning the immediate surroundings. Footsteps receded from nearby driveways, and the faint flicker of lights behind closed curtains suggested attentive observers. "We cannot linger," she said. "Someone has anticipated our movements." Tommy, adjusting his hat again, groaned. "I was hoping for a quiet stroll. Instead, we are being followed, observed, and apparently judged by every polite neighbour in the vicinity." "And yet," Tuppence replied, her tone resolute, "every observation we make, every subtle detail we note, brings us closer to understanding her true intentions. This woman is clever, but we are cleverer." They moved briskly down the quiet suburban street, the evening settling around them. Shadows lengthened across the neatly trimmed hedges and front lawns, yet Tuppence's mind raced ahead, cataloguing every detail from the hearth, the letters, and the neighbour's glimpse of them. The impostor's network was vast, her manipulations precise, and yet Tuppence sensed a vulnerability, a pattern waiting to be deciphered. Arriving back at their flat, they set the satchel carefully on the table, examining its contents once more. Letters and documents were cross-referenced, photographs compared, and the ledger meticulously scrutinized. Patterns emerged: financial exchanges, false identities, connections across London, and subtle hints of coercion. Tommy poured himself a cup of tea, attempting to calm his nerves. "Well, that was an adventure," he said, attempting a smile. "All the suspense of a theatrical play, and I never even got to sit in the stalls." Tuppence allowed herself a faint laugh. "Adventure, yes, but also a lesson. The ordinary can conceal the extraordinary, Tommy, and someone is orchestrating this with extraordinary precision." A final glance out the window confirmed the quiet suburban calm had returned, but the knowledge of observation lingered. Somewhere behind one of those curtains someone had watched, had taken note, and perhaps had anticipated the Beresfords' every move. Tuppence and Tommy shared a look, silent acknowledgement passing between them. The suburban street, so tidy, so mundane, had been the stage for secrets and misdirection. And though the danger had not escalated into immediate peril, the stakes were unmistakably higher. With the satchel of evidence, the notes and the telegram still in mind, the Beresfords prepared for the next phase of the investigation, aware that every ordinary moment could conceal extraordinary danger. London, or rather its suburbs, had revealed yet another layer of the impostor's intricate plan, and Tuppence, her mind sharp and alert, understood that one misstep could unravel everything. Yet, with Tommy at her side, humour and steadfastness intact, she felt ready to meet the challenge. The evening deepened, the lamps along the street flickering with a gentle glow. But for the Beresfords, the ordinary lamps did little to illuminate the extraordinary web of deceit that had spread across the city and into the quietest corners of its suburbs. The game was far from over. The flat in central London was quiet, save for the faint ticking of a clock and the soft rustle of papers as Tuppence arranged the documents they had retrieved from the suburbs. Outside, the city carried on with its usual murmur, the clip-clop of horse-drawn carts mingling with the hum of motor cars, a distant whistle from a train, the low chatter of pedestrians weaving between lampposts and shop fronts. Inside, however, tension settled like a fog, thick and invisible, pressing on every table, every chair, every surface where evidence lay scattered. Tuppence sat cross-legged on the floor, examining letters, photographs, and ledgers with the meticulous care of a jeweller inspecting a rare gem. Her eyes darted from one entry to another, tracing connections between names, dates, and locations. "Tommy," she said, pointing to a series of financial transactions. "Notice the pattern here. She is not acting at random. Every move, every disappearance, every false lead is calculated. She wants us to follow the trail, but she also wants us to think we are discovering it ourselves." Tommy, perched on a chair that had seen better days, ran his hands over his tie nervously before tugging at it again. "I do wish she'd left a map. Perhaps an illustration with stick figures, much easier to follow than cryptic notes and subtle gestures. Yet I cannot deny the thrill." Tuppence shot him a look. "This is not a game, Tommy. People's lives, reputations, perhaps even fortunes are at stake. Now observe the ledger entry here. FM paid in full, delivery by Thursday." What could that mean? Tommy leaned closer, squinting at the handwritten words. Could be a payment for, well, anything. A transaction, a delivery, or something less legal. "Exactly," Tuppence said. And notice the repetition of certain names in correspondence. Solicitors, socialites, distant acquaintances. Connections overlap. She is building a web, and the web touches more people than we initially suspected. They revisited the roster of suspects introduced in previous chapters, evaluating each individually. The nervous solicitor, once thought suspicious, revealed nothing beyond anxiousness and routine precision. The socialite from the club, while flirtatious and overly observant, appeared motivated more by vanity than malice. The distinguished gentleman, previously imposing, revealed hints of curiosity mixed with professional obligation rather than nefarious intent. Red herrings clarified themselves through this detailed cross-examination, leaving only the faintest outlines of the impostor's true network. Tommy exhaled with relief. So, some of our earlier suspicions were mere distractions. One can grow fond of red herrings. They make one feel clever without consequences. Tuppence's lips twitched in amusement. Yes, but cleverness without accuracy is useless. Observe, even the minor details, the placement of chairs, the order of letters, reveal more than the obvious. The mundane often masks intent. Their discussion was interrupted by a faint knock at the door. Tuppence rose cautiously, moving toward it with the poise of a cat. Through the peephole she glimpsed a courier, delivering a small envelope. She retrieved it, careful to note the handwriting, a familiar slant, deliberate yet teasingly hurried. Tommy leaned over, voice low. "Another note. I suppose it contains a further test of our wits." Tuppence unfolded the paper, reading aloud in a measured tone. "You follow well, but do you perceive all? Midnight, the wharf, alone. Trust the shadows, not the familiar. M.B." Tommy groaned theatrically. Alone again. She is insistently solitary in her invitations. One would think she expected us to lose nerve. Tuppence's expression was serious, though tinged with the excitement she always felt at a clue. "No, Tommy, this is not mere insistence. This is strategy. She knows our methods, anticipates our attention, and is testing our limits. Every note, every instruction, every carefully placed misdirection is part of the challenge." They returned to the scattered papers, their analytical pace now sharper, more deliberate. Tuppence traced connections between the financial ledgers and the forged documents, constructing a network of influence, coercion, and subterfuge. Patterns emerged. Payments, forged wills, anonymous letters, and subtle threats revealed a larger plan than previously imagined. Tommy, still fussing with the chair beside him, muttered, "I am beginning to believe Our Lady is conducting a London-wide experiment in suspense. One might expect prizes at the end, perhaps applause, or a small celebratory cup of tea with our adversary." Tuppence ignored his theatrics, focusing on the documents. "Here, this forged will. Notice the beneficiaries listed and the handwriting style. It is deliberate, designed to mislead, yet consistent with other items we have examined. The motive becomes clear: inheritance. She is attempting to manipulate outcomes, control fortunes, and perhaps blackmail her way into influence." Tommy leaned forward, expression suddenly serious. "Inheritance. So, this is not mere mischief. She is aiming for tangible gain. That explains the precision, the manipulation, the misdirection. She is calculating every step, anticipating every observer." "Exactly," Tuppence said. "And look here, the small trinket found in the suburbs, the folded letters, the ledger entries, They all point to the same network. She is connected to high society, to financial interests, to social circles that are entirely legitimate on the surface, but in her hands they become tools. Their deduction was interrupted by another minor clue. A scrap of newspaper slipped beneath the door, reporting an unrelated burglary across town. Tommy held it up, frowning. Red herring, I presume, placed to distract. Tuppence nodded. Yes, observe how she manipulates perception. She uses misdirection, tests observation, and exploits assumption. The ordinary becomes extraordinary in her hands. They discussed the socialite connections, the minor solicitor, and the distinguished gentleman, cataloguing their interactions and re-examining their behaviour in light of this new revelation. Each minor detail, the angle of a glance, hesitation in speech, mannerisms, was now a potential clue to motive and association. Hours passed as they cross-referenced financial transactions with the ledger entries, forged documents and letters. Tommy, exhausted yet engaged, muttered complaints about misplaced chairs, cluttered papers, and the increasingly labyrinthine nature of the investigation. Tuppence, for her part, speculated dramatically on the impostor's emotional state, meticulous, calculating, daring, and perhaps a touch theatrical. "Observe, Tommy," she said, gesturing to a series of ledger entries. "Notice the timing, the choice of words, the subtle misspellings. It is deliberate. She expects us to see some of the truth while remaining blind to the rest." He shook his head. One might admire her artistry, were it not for the stakes. One's admiration is tempered by the inconvenience of almost being duped. By late afternoon, a startling realization emerged. Tuppence traced the network back to a prominent London social figure, a woman of wealth and influence whose involvement had been hinted at in earlier letters, but never confirmed. Connections between financial exchanges, forged documents, and social correspondence pointed unmistakably to her. Tommy's eyes widened. This is serious. We are not merely chasing an impostor in isolation. This is a conspiracy reaching into the heart of the city's upper society. Yes, Tuppence said softly, tracing a name across the ledger. And the forged will confirm's motive. Inheritance, control of assets, influence. All the previous clues, the notes, the red herrings, even the staged encounters lead to this. She has constructed an elaborate, multi-layered plan. They leaned back, exchanging a glance that spoke volumes. Excitement, apprehension, and the realization that the next phase would demand precision, courage, and wit in equal measure. The evening shadows lengthened outside their window, falling across the flat and illuminating the scattered papers. Every street lamp, every distant footstep, every passing carriage seemed infused with potential significance. The impostor's influence extended far beyond what they had observed. Her orchestration touched every corner of their investigation, guiding, misdirecting, and observing simultaneously. Tommy poured himself a cup of tea, muttering under his breath. We must tread carefully. One misstep, and all these discoveries could be compromised. Tuppence smiled faintly. Exactly. And yet, we have the advantage of observation, deduction, and our wits. Each layer we uncover brings us closer to understanding her motives, and to anticipating her next move. A final glance at the notes revealed another pattern. Every instruction, every encounter, had been staged to test their deduction, to measure their attention to detail, and to assess their persistence. She was clever, meticulous, and audacious, but not infallible. Tomorrow, Tuppence said softly, we follow the trail further. We approach the wharf, observe, and prepare. The next move will be decisive. Tommy, sipping his tea, nodded, and I shall endeavour not to trip over any garden hoses this time. She laughed lightly, though tension remained. Focus, Tommy, this is no time for theatrics. The climax is approaching, and every detail, every ledger, letter, note, and observation matters. And with that, they organised their evidence, carefully cataloguing the letters, documents, and photographs. Every thread, every connection, every red herring and confirmed clue formed a tapestry of deception, intrigue, and impending revelation. The impostor's reach, her audacity, and her cunning became increasingly clear. The day ended with a sense of grim anticipation. The forged will had reframed everything. Motives were now tangible. stakes higher, and the confrontation they anticipated loomed nearer. Shadows in the city seemed longer, every sound heavier, every passing figure potentially significant. Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a final look before retiring for the night, knowing that the coming hours would demand courage, cunning, and unwavering attention to detail. The web of deception had been partially unravelled, but the true game, the confrontation with the woman who called herself Mrs. Beresford, was still ahead. And somewhere in London, watching, orchestrating, and anticipating, the impostor smiled faintly, confident that the stage was set for the next act. The drawing room was transformed. Candles flickered in ornate silver holders, casting a soft glow across the polished mahogany table and the gleaming cutlery arranged with meticulous precision. A subtle orchestra, stationed near the far end of the room, murmured through the soft strains of a waltz, the notes drifting and mingling with the murmur of conversation. Every detail, the gleam of crystal glasses, the gentle clinking of teaspoons against china, the polished silver candlesticks, was designed to project elegance and calm. Yet beneath the surface, the tension was palpable. Tommy and Tuppence knew that appearances were deceiving. In this room of polite smiles and measured conversation, the impostor moved among them, weaving a web of falsehoods with careful poise. Tuppence leaned slightly toward Tommy, whispering under her breath as they took their seats at opposite ends of the table. "Observe. Every gesture, every glance, every pause is calculated. She knows we are watching." Tommy adjusted his jacket nervously, eyes scanning the room. "I see. And she expects us to notice nothing. Charming, in a sinister sort of way. And their guests were an eclectic mix, previously introduced in earlier chapters. The nervous solicitor, eyes darting frequently to the clock. The flirtatious socialite, who tilted her head in ways designed to draw attention yet deflect scrutiny. The distinguished gentleman, who scrutinized each newcomer with a polite but piercing gaze. And a handful of minor characters whose relevance was yet uncertain. Each person carried a motive, a mannerism, a subtle tell that might reveal a connection to the impostor. The impostor herself arrived with the effortless grace of someone accustomed to attention and deception. Her coat was dark, her hat perched just so, and a faint floral, spicy perfume, the same as before, wafted into the room, drawing subtle glances from those nearby. She moved with careful intent, shaking hands lightly, exchanging polite pleasantries while scanning the faces around her. Tommy's fingers itched to reach for a notebook, but Tuppence placed a gentle hand on his arm, signalling patience. Observation first, deduction second. Tuppence sipped her wine, letting her gaze drift over the table, noting the tiny details, a misplaced handkerchief embroidered with initials, the hesitant gesture of a hand over a mouth during conversation, the almost imperceptible tapping of a finger on the table's edge. Each was a thread in the tapestry of the impostor's carefully constructed persona. Tommy leaned over, whispering, "Do you think she suspects us yet?" Tuppence's eyes flicked toward the impostor, who smiled politely at another guest while subtly scanning the room. "I doubt it. Or if she does, she is masking it brilliantly. We must test her, provoke responses without revealing our intentions." The conversation flowed around them, polite and measured, yet layered with veiled threats and hidden agendas. Tuppence's ears pricked for subtleties, a misstatement here, a pause too long there, an overheard fragment of conversation suggesting collusion. The socialite leaned toward the distinguished gentleman, murmuring something that made his brows rise slightly, while the solicitor's hands tightened around his glass. Each reaction was recorded mentally by the Beresfords, each nuance catalogued for later analysis. Tuppence nudged Tommy slightly, drawing his attention to the impostor's subtle interaction with a footman who had appeared momentarily distracted by a tray of hors d'oeuvres. "See how she maneuvers," she whispered. "She controls the flow of attention, ensuring certain guests are observed while others are diverted. Classic manipulation." Tommy nodded, eyes narrowing. "It is quite theatrical. One feels we are characters in a play and she, the director." "Exactly," Tuppence said, her tone low but sharp. "And it is our task to read the script between the lines." A slight commotion at the far end of the table drew their attention. An innocent-looking cousin, flustered and blushing, had dropped a wineglass. The clatter sounded alarming in the otherwise polished ambience, drawing murmurs from nearby guests. Tuppence's mind raced. Was this distraction deliberate, a misdirection orchestrated by the impostor, or merely happenstance? Tommy leaned toward her, whispering, "Do we consider it relevant or merely comedic relief?" Tuppence's lips curved in a faint smile. "Both, perhaps, but always observe first, assume nothing. Even an accident can carry significance." As dinner progressed, the impostor subtly revealed inconsistencies in her story. A reference to a ledger, muttered under her breath to the socialite, caught Tuppence's attention immediately. She exchanged a quick glance with Tommy, signalling silent acknowledgement. The ledger mentioned was the same one the Beresfords had scrutinized in previous investigations, evidence that the impostor was testing their vigilance while attempting to mask her tracks. Tuppence allowed herself a moment of whispered commentary. "She is daring us to catch her, Tommy. Every word, every gesture is a taunt, a challenge." Tommy smirked. "A challenge, yes, and most vexing, as I'd hoped for a quiet evening." Meanwhile, the minor clues began to accumulate. The faint scent of perfume persisted in the air, unmistakable to Tuppence now. The misplaced handkerchief, initially dismissed, was tucked near the impostor's plate, its initials matching those found in a letter from the ledger. An overheard remark about a certain delivery hinted at financial irregularities, while the cousin's flustered behaviour drew further suspicion, though ultimately serving as a red herring. Tuppence and Tommy began to manipulate the conversation, gently steering topics to elicit reactions. A casual mention of an upcoming social gathering drew a slight hesitation from the impostor, her eyes flicking toward the table's edge where documents were subtly repositioned. A joke about a distant relative's inheritance caused a faint tightening of her lips. Each micro-expression, each pause was noted and mentally recorded by the Beresfords. Tommy whispered, "She nearly realizes we are aware of her movements." "Yes," Tuppence murmured, eyes keen. "And we must keep her off balance. Observe, distract, and provoke just enough to reveal her true motives without alarming her." The orchestral music swelled briefly, and the impostor's attention momentarily wavered. Tuppence seized the opportunity, letting her gaze drift toward a corner where a small envelope had been inadvertently left by the waiter. Sliding it subtly into her pocket, she noted its contents later, confirmation of her calculated movements, a plan for another rendezvous, and a final hint at her overarching scheme. Time seemed to compress, the room's elegance contrasting sharply with the undercurrent of menace. The impostor, for all her poise, began to show signs of unease, quickened glances, a slight stiffening of posture, and the faintest crease in her brow when another guest commented on her recent activities. Tuppence and Tommy exchanged silent signals, acknowledging their proximity to a breakthrough. Suddenly, a subtle commotion distracted the table. A tray of dessert toppled slightly, and the impostor's eyes darted to it. In that instant, Tuppence noticed a delicate chain, partially concealed, slip from her sleeve, a personal item left behind in haste. Heart pounding, she registered the significance immediately. Incontrovertible proof of identity, a thread linking the impostor to her prior manipulations. Tommy leaned toward her, whispering, "She's gone. Left the room. That chain, was that hers?" Tuppence nodded, eyes fixed on the small piece of evidence. "Yes, and it changes everything. Every hesitation, every misleading gesture, it all confirms her. The next step must be decisive." The guests continued their conversations, oblivious to the subtle shifts occurring just beneath the surface. Tuppence and Tommy, however, were acutely aware of the proximity of danger, the precision of deception, and the delicate interplay of clues and red herrings. Every detail was now critical, every micro-expression a potential revelation. The impostor's disappearance left a tension in the room, a void that pulsed with anticipation. Tuppence leaned slightly closer to Tommy, voice low but firm. This was the stage for her manipulation. She orchestrated the evening with care, daring us to notice, testing our perception. And we have noticed. But she remains elusive, her plan unfolding. Tommy nodded, adjusting his tie once more. We have the evidence, the observations, and the proof. Her chain. The stage is set. The finale approaches. Even as they departed the room, blending with the polite exodus of other guests, the candlelight flickered against the crystal, casting shadows that danced across the walls, shadows reminiscent of the imposter herself, always present, ever observant, and always a step ahead. The evening left them both exhilarated and tense. The imposter had been cornered subtly, her confidence shaken, yet she remained at large. The personal item left behind, the delicate chain, was the tangible link, confirming suspicions that had been building for weeks. Outside, London's night air carried the hum of the city, blending distant carriage wheels, the faint whistle of a train, and the occasional dog barking in alleyways. The couple walked side by side, each step deliberate, hearts steady yet aware of the looming confrontation. Tuppence's hand rested briefly on the satchel containing notes, documents, and now the chain. Everything we've observed, the ledger, the letters, the subtle gestures tonight, points to her final plan. We must be ready. Tommy let out a slow breath. I dare say we are, though I would prefer a less theatrical setting next time. Perhaps a quiet park bench? Tuppence smiled, though her eyes were focused, alert. The drama is unavoidable, Tommy, and it is what keeps us alive, keeps us sharp. They walked on, London's streets glowing in gaslight and electric lamplight, aware that the imposter's careful orchestration had nearly been undone tonight. Yet she remained free, her motives still partially concealed, her plan continuing to unfold. And in the shadows, where candlelight could not reach, she observed, calculating, anticipating, and setting the stage for the confrontation that would ultimately reveal all. The telegram had not been specific in time, only in place. But Tuppence and Tommy had learned long ago that instructions from the woman who called herself Mrs. Beresford were rarely literal. They gathered their notes, the satchel of documents, and the delicate chain, the personal item she had left behind at the dinner, as twilight fell across London. Shadows lengthened along the cobblestones, the evening air cool yet heavy with anticipation. "Are we certain this is wise?" Tommy asked, adjusting his coat. "Alone by the docks in the middle of the night? We are courting peril, if not worse." Tuppence's eyes sparkled with determination. "Wise, perhaps not. Necessary, definitely. Every step we have taken has led to this. She has orchestrated everything, and now we follow the final threads. It ends tonight." Their departure from the flat was careful, every footstep measured to avoid drawing attention. Yet as they turned the corner, they immediately spotted the imposter herself, slipping between a shuttered shop and the shadows beyond, her dark coat blending seamlessly with the evening gloom. "There she is," Tuppence murmured. "Keep pace, but do not rush. Observe, anticipate, act strategically." Tommy's response was a dramatic sigh. "Strategically, yes, although I feel my legs are about to stage a rebellion." They pursued her through the narrow streets, where lamplight flickered against cobblestones, casting fractured shadows that twisted and danced with their movement. Pedestrians unwittingly became obstacles, a woman emerging from a shop startled, a child running after a stray ball, a grocer loading crates. Tommy repeatedly muttered apologies, catching his sleeve on protruding signposts, while Tuppence moved with sleek efficiency, eyes fixed on the figure ahead. At a junction near a warehouse district, the imposter darted down an alleyway, disappearing briefly behind crates stacked against the brick walls. Tuppence paused, observing subtle footprints pressed into the damp soil, scattered fragments of paper fluttering at the corners. She noted the faint whiff of the floral spicy perfume, confirming the imposter's path. "Here," she said, "she has left the trail intentionally. Follow closely, but cautiously." Tommy obeyed, though he stumbled over a discarded box, sending a startled rat scurrying into the shadows. "Blast," he whispered. "Why is it always rats or crates?" "Because she wants us alert," Tuppence replied, her voice low. "Every distraction is deliberate. Keep your wits about you." The chase led them to a deserted section of the riverfront, warehouses looming like silent sentinels. The imposter moved with grace, climbing over low crates, pausing to glance back with a faint, teasing smile. Tuppence noted the subtle signals, a glance to the right, a tilt of the head, the sound of her boots echoing across metal grates. "She knows we are close," Tuppence whispered. "Observe her strategy. She is daring us to act rashly." Tommy, catching his breath, muttered, And yet she also knows we are methodical, no chance of hasty mistakes, for once. At a narrow dock, illuminated faintly by a single swinging lamp, the impostor stopped. She turned, hands raised in a graceful, almost theatrical gesture. "Well done," she said, voice light but confident. "You've followed cleverly, pieced together the trail I left. But now, perhaps we can negotiate." Tuppence's eyes narrowed. "Negotiate? On what terms?" "A simple exchange," the impostor said. "I step back, you leave without further pursuit, and the documents remain unseen. We can call it mutual understanding." Tommy stepped forward cautiously. "And if we refuse?" The impostor's eyes glimmered, a faint smile curling at the corners of her lips. "Then the chase continues, and you will see very quickly the consequences of interference." Tuppence's mind raced, retracing every clue. The forged will, the ledger entries, the chain, the notes left at the bookshop and dinner. The puzzle pieces clicked together in her mind, revealing a comprehensive picture: inheritance, financial manipulation, and a complex network of false identities. "You wanted to corner us with charm and threats," Tuppence said, her voice calm but resolute. "But it's too late. We have evidence, and we know who you are." The impostor's eyes flicked toward the chain, now secure in Tuppence's hand. A flicker of surprise passed her features, quickly masked by a smile. "Clever," she admitted. "I underestimated your persistence." Tommy, taking a cautious step, observed her posture, her subtle gestures, and the way she manipulated her surroundings. "So, your motive? Inheritance, revenge, manipulation. You orchestrated the dinners, the notes, the ledger distractions, the red herrings. Every step was calculated." The impostor inclined her head slightly. "Indeed. And yet, you persisted. A commendable effort, but futile, I fear." Tuppence, however, had anticipated this moment. "Not futile. Every clue you left, every step you orchestrated, has brought you here. And now your plan ends." She gestured toward the scattered papers in the satchel and the chain. "We know your true identity. We know your methods, your network, your deceptions. They are all exposed." The impostor's smile faltered. She glanced around the deserted dock, the warehouses looming silently behind, the river reflecting the faint glimmers of lamplight. A misstep, one wrong movement, could end her freedom. Tommy, always cautious, took a slow step forward. "Do not make any sudden moves. You can surrender now, or we can force matters unpleasantly." A tense silence followed. The water lapped softly against the quay, a faint wind rustled discarded crates, and the distant sound of a train echoed along the tracks. The impostor's composure wavered slightly, the confidence that had guided her through weeks of deception faltering under the weight of evidence and observation. Finally, she raised her hands in surrender, stepping back slowly. "Very well," she said, voice measured but tight. "I yield. You have bested me with observation and persistence, but know this: your vigilance nearly cost you." Tuppence's eyes glimmered. "Nearly, yes, but ingenuity, careful deduction, and the attention to detail, these are our weapons." Tommy stepped closer, securing the chain and documents. "And now, all evidence points to your culpability. The forged will, the ledger, the letters, they all tie together. Your inheritance scheme, your manipulations, and your network are revealed. It ends tonight." The impostor's expression shifted, a mixture of admiration, frustration, and resignation. "So the game concludes," she murmured. "Very well. You have outmaneuvered me." Tuppence allowed herself a faint smile, relief mingling with satisfaction. "Not just maneuvered, you have been exposed by your own overconfidence. Every note, every diversion, every carefully orchestrated red herring, it all provided the final threads we needed to unravel your plan." The deserted dock, with its echoing warehouses and lapping river, now held a sense of closure. The impostor, who had commanded attention, manipulated events, and nearly outwitted them, was finally captured, not by force, but through observation, deduction, and psychological acuity. Tommy exhaled, brushing his coat. "I dare say that was the most exhilarating evening of my life, and the longest chase by far." Tuppence chuckled, though her eyes remained sharp. Exhilarating, yes, but let us not underestimate what we have uncovered. Her network, her motives, her manipulations, they extend beyond this single confrontation. We have justice, but vigilance remains necessary. The impostor was led away by authorities who had been discreetly summoned, ensuring that the confrontation remained controlled and evidence preserved. The documents, the chain, the forged wills, and the ledger were all secured, their connections to her false identities and network fully documented. As the night deepened over London, the Beresfords walked away from the dock, their hands lightly brushing in silent acknowledgement. The city seemed calm once more, its ordinary rhythm restored, yet the echoes of the chase, the suspense, and the clever manipulations lingered in their minds. Tuppence glanced at Tommy, voice soft but firm. "It ends tonight, but only because we acted decisively, observed keenly, and never underestimated her. Every clue, every pattern, every subtle gesture counted. That is why she was caught." Tommy nodded, a small wry smile on his lips. "And we did it with style, courage, and, if I may say so, immense patience." Tuppence laughed lightly, shaking her head. "Patience, yes, and observation. Always observation. That is the true key." For the first time in weeks, the tension lifted. The impostor who had manipulated, deceived, and orchestrated intricate games across London was now contained. Justice, clever and precise, had prevailed. As they walked toward the familiar streets of central London, the moonlight reflecting on the river's surface, they allowed themselves a brief moment of satisfaction, knowing that their efforts had not only exposed deceit, but had also preserved integrity and security for those unwittingly involved. The city around them continued its nocturnal rhythm: footsteps, distant carriage wheels, the soft whisper of the wind along the river. But within that ordinary backdrop lay the extraordinary resolution of a carefully played game. The impostor had been unmasked, motives revealed, and threads of deception carefully disentangled, thanks to observation, intellect, and courage. And somewhere in the shadows, the echoes of the chase and confrontation lingered, a testament to vigilance, perseverance, and the unyielding determination of two detectives who refused to be misled. The night was finally theirs. A calm return to order after the tension, the chase, and the confrontation that had defined the climax of their investigation. The familiar streets of London felt unusually calm as Tommy and Tuppence made their way home. Gas lamps cast pools of warm light onto cobbled pavements, and the evening's chill was tempered by a gentle breeze. For the first time in weeks, there were no urgent notes, no mysterious footsteps, no subtle signs that someone was watching them. The chase was over, the impostor apprehended, and the documents, ledgers, and chain safely in their possession. Yet even in this calm, Tuppence's sharp eyes caught details most would overlook. A crooked sign on a corner shop, a shadow briefly flickering across a window pane, a discarded newspaper flapping against a fence. London's ordinary streets were always full of secrets, if one knew where to look. "I must admit," Tommy said, loosening his coat and shaking off the tension, "it is strangely comforting to return to this flat without having to sprint after a clever criminal." Tuppence, carrying the satchel of recovered documents, gave him a teasing glance. "Comforting for you, perhaps. I prefer to remain alert. One can never tell when the next impostor will appear." He sighed dramatically, dropping onto a chair by the table. "I do hope your definition of alert does not include leaping over furniture, ducking behind bookcases, or chasing shadows through docks and alleyways." She smiled, arranging the documents on the table with care. "Consider it a life lesson. Observation, deduction, persistence, all skills one must cultivate if one wishes to survive in a world of hidden motives." Tommy leaned back, allowing himself a moment of reflection. "And I suppose it is also a lesson in patience and modesty, two virtues I do not naturally possess, I fear." Tuppence laughed softly, shaking her head. "Modesty is overrated. Patience, however, is indispensable, especially when dealing with someone as clever as our friend the impostor." They sat together, reviewing the recovered documents once more. Letters and ledgers were cross-referenced, photographs carefully studied, and the chain, the personal item left at dinner, was examined, confirming the impostor's identity and linking her conclusively to the web of deception that had threatened multiple lives and fortunes. Each piece of evidence reinforced their deduction, painting a clear picture of inheritance schemes, false identities, and meticulous planning. Tuppence leaned back in her chair, eyes thoughtful. "It is remarkable, Tommy. Every clue, every red herring, every carefully staged distraction, it all fell into place. Observation and reason triumphed, but not without vigilance." Tommy nodded, rubbing his temples. "And yet," he said with a wry smile, "I think I need a fortnight of absolutely quiet days before I consider another case." Tuppence tilted her head, raising a brow. "Quiet, you say? I suspect the world will not grant you that luxury. There is always someone trying to deceive, manipulate, or mislead. And we are the inconvenient obstacles in their carefully plotted schemes." He chuckled, reaching for a cup of tea. "I see. Inconvenient obstacles. A delightful title for our line of work. Shall we toast to being a nuisance, then?" "Indeed," Tuppence replied, pouring a fragrant Earl Grey into their delicate china cups. Steam spiraled upward, curling in the lamplight like tendrils of the mystery that had just concluded. They clinked cups lightly, a soft chime marking a brief victory in the ongoing battle between order and intrigue. As they sipped, Tuppence recounted the evening's final moments in detail: the chase through London streets, the narrow dockside confrontation, and the imposter's subtle psychological manoeuvres. Tommy listened attentively, offering interjections of humour or incredulity, often exaggerating his near mishaps during the pursuit. "I must admit," he said, gesturing with his teacup, "that running across those alleyways, nearly colliding with every pedestrian within sight, was rather more exhausting than I had anticipated. And I swear, Tuppence, I may have inadvertently tripped over a very respectable dog in the process." Tuppence smiled indulgently. "Yes, you may have. But it is precisely your enthusiastic participation that kept the impostor on edge. Your near misses and frantic apologies added to the tension and ensured she did not regain composure." They reviewed the accomplices' roles, piecing together their motivations and connections. Some had been deliberately misdirected by the impostor, others were unwittingly entangled, and a few, like the minor courier and the nervous solicitor, were both tools and misperceptions. Each revelation neatly tied into the larger puzzle, closing loose ends without diminishing the subtle thrill of remaining questions. Tuppence laid out the letters and documents in neat stacks, arranging them by significance. Notice the alignment of evidence: the forged will, ledger entries, personal letters, and even the small trinkets she left behind. Each clue reinforced the narrative, providing motive, method, and opportunity. Tommy picked up the delicate chain, turning it over in his fingers. "And this," he said, "this little piece of jewellery is the final proof, cleverly left behind. A trap of sorts, but one that worked in our favour." "Yes," Tuppence agreed, "and it underscores a key point. Even the cleverest deceiver leaves traces. One must observe them with precision, patience, and care." As they continued their reflections, Tuppence's attention drifted to the window, where the ordinary London street lay quiet beneath the dim glow of lamplights. "It is curious," she mused, "how ordinary life conceals so much intrigue. Even in calm, familiar streets, danger and deception lie beneath the surface, waiting for the right observer to notice." Tommy raised an eyebrow, sipping his tea. "I fear you romanticize peril. Nonetheless, I concede that observation is indeed a worthwhile pastime, though I still hope for a day without it, merely reading a newspaper perhaps, and enjoying quiet tea." Tuppence laughed softly, the sound mingling with the soft clink of teaspoons and the faint hiss of steam from their cups. "Perhaps, Tommy, but I suspect the next case is never far away. The world has a way of presenting mysteries when least expected." A comfortable silence settled over the flat as they continued their tea, occasionally commenting on minor details of the recovered evidence or the evening's chase. The ordinary sounds of the neighbourhood, the distant call of a street vendor, a carriage rolling over cobblestones, the faint bark of a dog, reminded them that life had returned to normal for now. Tommy, setting down his cup, let out a long sigh of relief. "Well, I dare say, this case has come to a satisfactory conclusion. The impostor is captured, her schemes revealed, and all the threads we followed have led to resolution. A triumph, I believe." "Yes," Tuppence said, leaning back with a small smile. "And yet, One must always remain alert. London is full of surprises, and human ingenuity knows few bounds. Even in domestic calm, intrigue persists. They began to tidy the table, stacking papers, returning documents to envelopes, and securing the chain. Each action was deliberate, a final ritual marking the end of a complex case. Their collaboration, balance of observation and deduction, and mutual understanding had ensured the impostor's capture and the resolution of the tangled web of deception. As Tuppence placed the last envelope on the sideboard, a soft chime echoed from the front doorbell. Both froze, exchanging a glance heavy with anticipation and subtle humour. Tommy muttered, perhaps a late-night visitor, or merely another delivery. Tuppence's eyes sparkled, a mix of amusement and curiosity. Or perhaps, she said, another adventure, waiting to unfold. Tommy groaned, leaning against the doorframe. I was hoping for a quiet evening. Tea, reflection, perhaps a nap. But I suspect the universe has other plans. Tuppence laughed lightly, moving toward the door. Well, my dear, we have learned long ago that quiet days are rare in our line of work. Best we greet our guest with readiness and wit. The door opened to reveal the envelope slipped in by the postal service, innocuous yet promising, a new lead, a hint of another mystery, and the gentle reminder that the world, ordinary though it appeared, was full of hidden intrigue. Tommy sighed, a mixture of exasperation and anticipation. I see. No rest for the observant, and certainly none for the impatient. Tuppence picked up the envelope, holding it thoughtfully. Exactly. But for now, let us savour the calm we have earned. Tea, reflection, and the satisfaction of a case completed. They returned to their chairs, cups in hand, the soft lamplight bathing the room in warmth. Outside, London slept, or at least appeared to, while inside the Beresfords enjoyed the rare luxury of domestic calm, their minds still alert, hearts still keen, and spirits buoyed by the triumph of intellect, observation, and perseverance. The ordinary world, it seemed, would never remain entirely ordinary for long, but for tonight it could be savoured, a city full of hidden intrigue, a flat brimming with the spoils of clever deduction, and two detectives ready for whatever subtle mysteries awaited them next.